Okay, everybody, welcome to the workshops. In particular, warm welcome to Daniel. Nice to have you on board with our team. Graham Weaver and I chair this. I'm just chair the service delivery and just chairing these today, so that's good. I presume Martin's there?
Yep, I'm here, Graham.
Thanks, Martin. I can't see your cheery face at the moment, so over to you. Thank you.
All right, good morning all through the chair and councillors. Yep, so just to introduce Daniel Garden. He's from Paddle Delamore Partners, which we call PDP for short, who we've engaged as our wastewater engineering consultants for this work. So Daniel will help out if you've got you go too technical on me, then Daniel will help me answer the questions.
Yep. Hi everyone.
Morning, Daniel.
Yeah, so this morning we've got a workshop on the preferred treatment option for the Cambridge wastewater treatment plant. So this is in just for the treatment options on the plant itself, rather than the total project. So it's just on that defined area. So with that, we'll start. I'll try and share my screen. He said, be technically challenged, but we can try. Okay, can you all see that?
Very good. Good to go.
Oh, good, yeah, good. Yeah.
Excellent, thanks, Mark.
Okay, so to start off with the background. So obviously, the Cambridge wastewater treatment plant short-term consent was obtained in 2020, which was a 6-year consent for when we had to have a new plant operating by 2026. That was subject to the sub-regional discussions. And the outcome of the detailed business case is that we'll build a Cambridge standalone plant. It was agreed that we'd be building to at least Pukekohe standard discharge. We're still working on the final discharge methodology with the Kaitiaki group. The options, we'll talk about those a bit later, but we haven't finalised those yet, so they're not part of this workshop. And we've got our consenting strategy underway. I might just bear with me just for a second. I think I've got it right. Slightly different to what I've got in front of me, that's all. And yes, so we're underway with the consenting strategy. And as part of that, there's a requirement to identify this treatment train to obviously show that we can meet the standards required. So the design criteria we're looking at for what the new wastewater treatment plant is trying to achieve is to cater for the significant population growth. So we're expecting 230% growth from now until the end of the 35-year consent. Again, very high effluent quality, at least the Pukekohe standards, which are the current best practice. Aim to minimise electricity and chemical consumption. And whilst minimising electricity or chemical usage, there is a trade-off. Both these elements increase costs over time. And unfortunately, advanced wastewater treatment processes to achieve high effluent quality do require high electrical and chemical usage. So while we try to minimise them, we can't eliminate them altogether. Aim to minimise solid production, and solid production is what's left in the solid stream that's not liquid that goes to discharge to the river, but the solids that need to either go to landfill or other options. So we're looking at options for biosolids disposal as well. Obviously, we need to minimise odour on the site. The new plant is coming ever closer to residential areas. Again, with Cambridge Park up on the hill behind already established, and C3 will be coming along just across the river. So we need to make sure we're doing all we can to minimise the odour potential. We need to minimise greenhouse gas emissions. And again, greenhouse gas emissions are now fairly well known that they, what they cause, and they need to be reduced and minimised along the way. So all wastewater treatment plant of our options generate greenhouse gas emissions. by the operation of the process units. They produce carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. And these have all been assessed in line with current best practice. And then to reuse any of the existing infrastructure where possible on the site is also a consideration. More than welcome to sing out if you've got any questions along the way.
Thanks, Martin.
So our population projections and staging timeline. So the proposed upgrade timeline is stage 1 commissioned by 2025. That's the first point there. And then a stage 2 upgrade approximately 10 years later, or when the population reaches that trigger point of 37,000 people. So it could be later or it could be earlier, depending on growth. Those the growth projections on there, the red line is in line with NIDIA high projections. So that's what we use and predicting 2035 as when stage 2 would be required. And then once
Martin, can I ask a question about that? I'm presuming that stage 1 will be built so that in the 10-year frame when stage 2 comes on, there's no extra capital expenditure to get that. It's more or less a clip-on addition. Can you understand what I'm saying?
I understand what you're saying. The answer is not strictly correct. There will be a capital required which we'll get to shortly.
Okay.
But stage 1 will be designed so all the key elements are built big enough. So the inlet works and all the stuff that can be built to both stages will be built in stage 1. And then if you over design, a treatment plant doesn't work well. So that's why you need a stage 2 once that comes online.
Thank you.
And that investment in circa 2025 will last till the end of the consent period in 2061.
Thank you.
So if growth is slower, then that 2035 will slide out.
Mm.
So the next slide is on the effluent quality. So those are the parameters. So the middle line shows what the existing plant achieves. So for CBOD, it's 20. For suspended solids, it's 20. There's no measurement, no consent limit for ammonia, which is the NH4N, I believe. The total nitrogen is 385, and total phosphorus is 15, and total E. coli is 126. And you can see the significant shift to the right of the probable new consent limits, which are significantly strong, more stringent than our existing ones.
Martin, could I just ask a question there? Do we actually have a comparison of what the actual river quality is like at the moment? What would be when we're looking at the possible new consent limits, what is the standard in the river at the present time? Do we know that?
Yeah, so we're doing an AEE, which is an assessment of the environmental effects, which will say what the river is, condition of the river. But we need to, but it will, regardless of that, it will show that we need to be doing the best practical option, which is what the Pukekohe standards are. So it'll be hard to shift away from those.
I'm not trying to shift away from it, Martin, just in terms of what these discharge levels will mean to the river. And I would imagine, for argument's sake, the E. coli level will be far better than the existing river standard at the present time. But look, it would be just nice to know that we're actually making an improvement to the river, not still having an impact, I suppose, a negative impact.
Yeah, so we'll have a significant betterment on the river. Obviously, it's not just us. Everybody needs to do their bit, but we'll be having significant betterment from those standards. Yeah. So we then find those the development of options, and so the key treatment considerations are for phosphorus removal, nitrogen removal, filtration, which is for the suspended solids, disinfection, which is for the E. coli, and how do we minimise solids management, so we know how much we've got to dispose off site. And optimization across all of those 5 things is needed to find the right balance between affordability and environmental outcomes, and balancing our community expectations in those areas. So it's very much an economic, environmental and cultural balancing act. So we considered 4 options, and I won't go into too much details because there's a slide up on each one. But basically, the first one focuses on nitrogen removal. The second one more on phosphorus removal, and the third one is a combination with them with the addition of digester. And option 4 is a variation again, which is the latest sort of treatment, which is for membrane aerated biofilm, which we'll go into those in a bit more detail in the next few slides. Try to keep it as simple as possible, but it is a complicated process. So this option is optimized for nitrogen removal with minimum carbon dosing required to assist with nitrogen removal. This option requires full chemical dosing for phosphorus removal. It has a moderate electricity consumption in comparison to the other options, has moderate biosolids production. It has low greenhouse gas emissions, the lowest capital cost, and low whole of life cost. Option 2.
Martin, could I just interrupt quickly? In terms of, we've said that we're looking at the Pukekohe standard.
Yeah.
When you're going through the options, can you tell us how the Pukekohe plant fits in with the options? Is it a combination, or is it one of these options that we're talking about? I suppose I'm looking for an example where we've actually got a treatment facility working in New Zealand that's meeting the standards, is well tested, and we're not taking any risks in terms of whether it'll work or not.
Yeah, so all options 1, 2 and 3 are all established treatment trains in New Zealand, and all of will have examples of being used in New Zealand. I think, Daniel, correct me if I'm wrong, I think option 1 is the Pukekohe, the picture is the Pukekohe plant.
That's correct. Yep, that's a picture I took a couple of months ago, the recently commissioned bioreactor number 3 there at Pukekohe, and option 1 is just that, the Pukekohe treatment plant process. Yep.
Yeah, and all of the options deliver on the Pukekohe effluent quality standards. Just there's a slight variance in how you get there. So option 2 is it concentrates more on efficient biological removal of the phosphorus. You might call option 1 needed a lot of chemicals to reduce the phosphorus. So this option concentrates biological removal of phosphorus to reduce that chemical usage. Whilst removing most of the nitrogen, it might need a minor chemical dosing to aid that. And again, as with the option 1, it's got moderate electricity consumption, moderate biosolids production, low greenhouse gas emissions, low capital cost, and low whole of life cost. I think that's another picture of Pukekohe membranes are inside that, underneath those gratings. Option 3 has got very similar start-off processes to option 1 and 2, but we've added a primary treatment step, which is the PST, up front of the bioreactors, and a further solid stream processing via anaerobic digester. And this is for energy recovery and reducing biosolids volumes. This option, the primary settlement tanks and the digester are not typically included on treatment plants of this size. Normally, they work on population base over 55,000, because then you've got enough digestion capacity to produce enough electricity for it to pay for itself. Whereas for smaller plants, paying for the capital cost via electricity savings doesn't stack up. But it does have the lowest electricity consumption because you do produce some electricity. Yeah, it has a lower biosolids production Again, low greenhouse gas emissions, but not as low as options 1 and 2. It has the highest capital cost, and it has a whole life cost. And the whole life cost is based on if you put it in a primary sed tank, that you take the carbon out of your source to put it in the digester to produce electricity, whereas what you really need is that carbon. The carbon is what you need to reduce the nitrogen. So if you take all the carbon out, you then have to add a lot of carbon. You have to buy chemicals to put that carbon back in. Option 4 is the latest technology using membrane aeration. So on the picture on the right, where all those fine bubbles are, I don't know if you visited the Cambridge or TMU2 wastewater treatment plant, we've got the big surface aerators, big machines with big paddles on them that make a lot of air. So that's sort of old, very old technology. The improvement to that is a plant that we would build would have diffusers in the bottom, ceramic diffusers that put up the air up from the bottom. But you still get a lot of air escaping. You don't use all the air, it escapes to the top. With this option, you get very fine bubbles. So most of the air you're making is used, and therefore it's more economical from electricity perspective. But I say it is emerging technology, not presently used in New Zealand. It still requires further membranes downstream to get the quality we need. It's got low electricity consumption, moderate biosolids, lowest greenhouse gas emissions. Or it's got the lowest greenhouse gas emissions. You'll see on a table to come shortly, by about 25% lower than options 1, 2, and 3. But it's got high capital cost, and it's got the highest whole of life cost. So to do the options analysis, we use software called BioWin. So we put through all of those options through a model that simulates a wastewater treatment plant, and that's been used to size the treatment units, the quantity of effluent, the electricity and chemical consumption, the greenhouse gas emissions, and solid production. So that's allowed for those comparison of options. That's quite a complicated bit of software that takes a long time to run for each option, but it does give you a quite predictive outcome. So then we get to this table which compares the outputs from each thing, and again we strive to meet the quality. So the effluent quality. So we're looking for 5 for nitrogen. So option 1 is predicts a 4.1 outcome. Option 2 5. Option 3 is 11.6, and that's why it needs the added carbon to get the 11.6 back down to 5. And option 4 delivers 3.5 nitrogen. I won't go through each line on the table, but that was sort of the main difference. So then you can see for alum is the chemical we dose for phosphorus removal. And so option 1 requires 1,200 litres a day, whereas option 2, if we went for the biological P route, only requires 550 litres per day. So that's the overriding difference, and that chemical is expensive and will only get more expensive. And then for greenhouse gas emissions, find them. So the total CO2 for the options 1, 2, and 3 are all around 2,000, just over 2,000 kilograms a day. And option 4 is 1,400 kilograms a day. So it does offer benefit in greenhouse gas emissions. All 4 of these options do give a 95% reduction in the current plant's greenhouse gas emissions. So we get significant benefit from a new plant in the greenhouse gas arena, from 17,000 a day down to 2,000. And at the end is the last one is electricity required. And again, options 1 and 2 are similar. Option 3 is 500 kilowatts a day less, and option 4 is around 300 kilowatts less than options 1 and 2.
Martin, is there any thought of installing any solar panels down there which would help with the electricity cost, or is it not worthwhile?
So we could, we look at installing solar panels, but they're more for the day-to-day electricity, lighting, power consumption, rather than you wouldn't get enough solar to generate the power needed.
No.
For the process. Yeah.
Okay.
So considering all of the options, they all cater for growth. All options meet the effluent quality required. There's minimal difference in electricity usage. Option 2 uses the least chemicals. There's a minimal difference in the solids production. Again, all options can be built to have the same odor outcomes. Option 4 has the lowest greenhouse gas emissions, or as I said, all options significantly reduce the current emissions. And all options maximize reuse of assets where possible. One of the things we're looking at from the solids production is we're just completing a solids disposal strategy. And one of the options we're looking at is disposing of the solids to Noki, who are a company that do worm composting in Tokoroa. All of Hamilton's biosolids go there. They're looking at building another plant somewhere between Cambridge and Matamata, and looking at taking biosolids from Cambridge and Matamata Piarco district to turn it into worm compost, which gives very good environmental outcomes.
Okay, Martin, can I just ask a question there? In terms of when you say there's a difference in solids production, where does I would imagine the effluent stream coming in has got a solid load, and so how can the treatment comply, I suppose, and we get different levels of solid production? Where does the difference go to?
So if you have a digester, the process of digesting it reduces that solid loading. So total concentration, total volumes of meters cubed a day for options 1 and 2 and 4 around 12.5, just over 12.5. If you had a digester, that reduces it to 8, because it does more. Daniel might be able to answer more technically, but by digesting it, you reduce the solids significantly.
Yeah,
like a stomach, really.
So effectively, we're doing a lot of the worm farm job before it actually has to go there.
Yes. Yeah.
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 All right.
But it does have the penalty of using all the carbon. And then for the balance of the plant, so sort of only talked of the main treatment train for the plant. All options require preliminary treatment, which will be screens at the start of the plant and grit removal. They'll need a lift pump station, chemical dosing systems, solids thickening and dewatering equipment, odor treatment, UV disinfection, and all the other stuff that goes with building a plant. So all those are required for whichever option we go with. Oh, someone stole the cost estimates today. Oh, slides in different order to mine, sorry. So that's an indicative footprint. So that thick black line is the extent of the treatment plant, with the existing plant aerated pond in the middle there, and the RIBs where we dispose. So currently the discharge goes on top of these rapid infiltration beds and then seeps through the land into the river. This over here is the old NIWA experiment down on this land here. All of the land is, you'll see we've selected this area here for the new site in here, and then that's a better close-up of it. You can see we're restricted from the ground is geotechnically challenging in a lot of areas, but also the 2 orange lines here are the 220 kilovolt power lines that cross the site, which make it very difficult to build under. So we've just sort of gone as far to the side of them as we can. We just encroach just at the end, but we'll get permission to do that. But it does make, although we've got a large site, it does make it challenging on where we can build a new plant. Luckily, it's got a much smaller footprint than the old plant. We did look at purchasing some land from the quarry in here as an option to build. But again, the only land they were really interested in selling to us was under the power lines. So that didn't really pan out. So the discharge options, again, we're working through with the Kaitiaki group. There's sort of three options we've honed down to, which is land disposal via the rapid infiltration beds. So continuing to discharge on the rapid infiltration beds and then seeping into the river. There's some issues with that as they've been used since the plant was built, and they are laden with phosphorus from when it was the old meatworks treatment plant. So there's quite a lot of underlying phosphorus captured in the land. So the more we keep putting new highly treated effluent on it, it would still collect phosphorus on its way to the river. So that's one thing we've got to take into consideration. Another option is a bankside rock gabion structure to outfall directly into the river. And the third option is a pipe diffuser directly into the river. Currently, the preference from the Kaitiaki group is option 1, but we're still working around the challenges of that plant.
Martin, in that case, we're spending a whole heap of money stripping the phosphorus out, and it's going to be picking up phosphorus going through that land disposal option. Is that correct?
That's correct. So the work we're currently doing to understand that a bit better is even if we don't put the effluent on top of that and it seeps through and slowly washes the phosphorus out, if we don't and we use one of the other options, then the groundwater in the area and the rain will still leach out that phosphorus and could do it in, rather than it being controlled, if we're continually adding effluent on top, it will be a controlled release of that phosphorus in the ground. If we leave it, it could come out in large volumes from getting contaminated in the groundwater or from rain events. So the preferred option may be to have that come out slowly. So that's the options we're looking at. Yeah. The cost estimates. So for stage 1, the range is option 1 and 2 is 71 and 72 million, with then a $10 million plus increase in cost for options 3 and 4, followed by a further investment required in stage 2 in 2035 of another 20 to 25 million for options 1 and 2, to 29 and 27 million for options 3 and 4, given a total capital cost over the consent period of till 2061 is 94 million for option 1, 97 million for option 2, 110 for option 3, and 111 million for option 4. These estimates exclude costs for treated wastewater discharge, which is circa $3.5–4 million, consenting and other costs up until we start to build of 1.5 million. Site restoration, which the whole site, as we saw in those earlier slides, needs remediating, and the plan would be to return that to native, what it would have looked like before the plant was there, so back to native planting for the rest of that site. So that's looking around $2 million for that site restoration. And then disposal of the existing sludge Geo Bags is circa another $3 million. So that's about a $10 million capital cost on top of the costs on that table. The current LTP budget is $100.2 million.
Martin, can I ask you about an option that we talked about quite a long time ago, where we would combine the capital cost of a new plant with riparian planting that would benefit the overall river sort of water quality. Whether or not any of that consideration was put in, so that if we, just as an example, chose option 1 because you know, it's significantly cheaper than option 4, but use the difference in the cost to invest in native planting in the, you know, the most like contaminating catchments along the river. Like, was any of that work considered?
So this report is just on the treatment train. I mean, that'd be a council decision if they wish to invest further beyond the cost of the treatment plant in offsetting other areas of concern as well, would be a future council discussion and decision. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think we were given a preliminary report which indicated what improvement there might be, like, for instance, in nitrogen and phosphorus in the river itself. But we'd need to have that information again if we were going to do that balancing act at this time.
Yeah, but all these options deliver the required effluent quality.
They do. Yeah, I mean, I've been really pleased to see that analysis, actually, because I was thinking that there would be a big difference in the performance, you know, like the standard of the discharge. So it's been really valuable. Thank you.
Through the chair, Martin, you may wish to share with members the short-term consent. Wasn't there a condition in the short-term consent in terms of a contribution to planting within the catchment that the Kaitiaki group were helping us with?
Yep. So there was a total of $800,000 of planting and offset mitigation works to be done as part of the short-term consent, which was in the hands of the Kaitiaki group to get underway. And I think it was an initial capital cost of $200,000 and then $50,000 a year ongoing support for that. Yeah. So this slide shows the operating costs and then the MPV. So as you can see, options, there's little between the 4 options in operating costs of around $100,000 a year for all of the options. And that does grow in stage 2 to a $300,000 difference between option 2 and 3 operating cost. And so therefore the net present value over 35 years as option 1 and 2 come out with the same NPV of 113 million, and options 3 and 4 are 126 and 128 million. And the table on the right shows the makeup of those operating costs.
Martin, was there any sensitivity analysis done on any of the components of the options that might future-proof it, give it more resilience, perhaps, for whether it's climate change or, you know, like if we have to make payments for our emissions, you know, I don't know, or if there were higher discharge standards imposed for the various chemical, like nitrogen or phosphorus, like anything like that. So it's not necessarily the sort of straight out costs as this is done, but sort of scenarios in the future if different costings were applied to whether it's emissions or discharge improvements.
Yeah, so it wasn't done, but if the effluent quality changed, then each one of the options would require more, probably the same level of investment to take them to that next level of treatment.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And how you would achieve that. The analysis was sort of looked at really is the option 2. If you look at the operating costs, it's got the lowest chemical cost out of the 4 options, and that's probably the greatest risk is the ongoing cost of chemicals. They all use electricity, so increased electricity costs are sort of borne out, but the chemical cost really is the one that makes the most difference in ongoing risk.
Okay, thank you.
Martin, Graham here.
Yes.
Under the Tainui agreement on the Waikato River, central government are giving $7 million a year for 30 years. Now, in that agreement, they expected it would take that 30 years for that river to get where they wanted it to. In fact, the river has achieved that now, about 20 years ahead of time. And my big worry is that we are spending an enormous amount of money for very, very little gain in river quality.
Yep, no,
I'm just pointing it out. I'm just saying, I think we just need to go easy here. There are a lot of flora and fauna and things in that river that actually need a lot of these to actually preserve their life and grow and flourish. And I've seen that as a fisherman over 50 or 60 years. And I've always had this opinion, and I think Gary mentioned at one stage, where 400 metres down from the effluent outfall, the quality of the water is indistinguishable from having any gains. And I think going into those resource consent hearings, that some of those figures, which are actuals, should be brought up and probably discussed in a fairly serious matter. Thank you.
Yeah, I suppose to give effect to mana o te wai is to do the best for the river in the long term, and so it's everybody doing all contributing parties doing the best they can is the view. I would say that of the consenting authorities and of iwi. So the next slide is narrowing down to our preferred option. So option 2, which is the MBR configured for enhanced biological phosphorus removal, is the preferred option. It meets all of the criteria. It minimises chemical use, so that risk of future cost escalation, moderate electrical consumption, low greenhouse gas emissions, and low capital cost, and low whole of life costs. Again, one of the questions that have been asked is could the plant cater for wet industry? The option is that they could all cater for wet industry if it deemed that Cambridge was the right place for it. What it would do is significantly reduce its life expectancy before you would need another. So if wet industry came along in stage 1, then you would need to build stage 2 straight away to take for the capacity that wet industry was taking up. And consequently, you would need another further stage 3 going forward. So you'd have to look at the costs of what wet industry costs before you allow that to happen. But they could be treated, but it would be at significant cost of the capacity of the plant. And then there's a summary table that shows, just with some traffic light colours, how we come to option 2 as being the preferred one. So it's just taking all of those points from the slides, and if it met them, it's a green box. If it wasn't the best, it had a yellow box, and if it had the worst option, it was a red box. And so from that, option 2's just got the 2 yellow boxes. From a technical perspective, it's the preferred option as well. It's tried and tested, and we know it will do the job. So that's a picture of the plant showing the rapid infiltration beds of the long sandy bits. And the current aerobic pond is here. We'd like to reuse, on the stage 2 upgrade, the recent short-term consent upgrade, we desludged these 2 ponds and lined them at significant cost. So we will reuse those 2 lined ponds to cater for emergency flows. So for heavy rain events, or when the plant's offline, we'll be able to store that incoming flow in those 2 basins during those events. These black things are all the Geo Bags, which historically what happens when we've dewatered the plant or remove the solids, what we've done is we've dewatered it and put it into Geo Bags, which so it sits in there and slowly gets drier over years, but you're still left with the problem of having to take it off site at some stage. So the plan will be to remove all of these Geo Bags that are full of sludge, further dewater them and take them off site, and that's built into the costings of the plant. And that was the last slide.
From that, can you just point out roughly whereabouts the build is going to be on that, or is it not cover it?
Just here.
Okay.
That goes in that.
Yeah.
Goes in that.
I can just get a picture of that pylon by the river there. Is it the pylon there with the?
Yeah, that's the pylon
Yeah.
just there. So those lines,
Yep.
transmission lines go across there. Yeah. Yeah, which this area was a nice, good flat area to build on, but unfortunately the power lines are right across it. But equally, this area's got the best geotechnical or the least geotechnical risk. The ground's most solid in that area as well.
Okay.
So that brings us to the end. Oh, there was a slide which hasn't come through for some reason, which was next steps. So our next steps are to report to the Service Delivery Committee in October, just to refresh this workshop and confirm the preferred option. We're continuing with the consenting works, continuing with the enabling works. We'll continue with, once we've got the preferred option, with detailed design. And we're currently writing our procurement strategy to determine how we'll go forward, how we'll build the plant, whether it will be a traditional contract, whether it will be early contractor engagement, all those types of procurement questions we need to ask. And we'll present back once we've got that procurement strategy in place.
Martin, just through the chair, just a question, the preferred option of option 297 million, and we've allowed it just over 100 million in the LTP. Does that, do any of the options include any contingency, or is a contingency basically the sort of $3 million buffer?
No, so our budget is for the first 10 years, which is stage one. Obviously, we'll need to, the next LTP round, we will need to start thinking of putting money in for stage two. So we've got that set. So for option two, we've got 72 million plus the $10 million of other costs is 82 million. So currently that's got, that cost estimate is plus or minus 30% from at this level of design. So yeah, so there's still a lot of work to do to refine that, but we're looking at in that ballpark, and hopefully not 30% more than that, but we're looking at hopefully bringing it in around that number.
Thank you for that.
Martin, with those Geo Bags, once they're dry, have they got any nutritional value to be put on land or whatever, or can they do that happen?
Again, biosolids use on land is a very technical issue. There's not many places, unless you own your own land, it can't go on any dairy land. So it's very hard to find use for it. Some councils do an awful lot of drying and processing of it to enable to be made into compost for use on gardens. But the best option that we currently identified is that vermicomposting with a worm farm with Noki. So we're hoping that comes to fruition. It's around the same cost of disposing in landfill, but it does give a better environmental output.
Thank you.
Martin, I just wondered if Daniel had any extra comments, as he's had a lot to do with this process with council, additional to what you've given us, in terms of perhaps what's worked or what hasn't worked or what hasn't been quite so good at Pukekohe, what we need to be looking out for in the future, and yeah, just give us that background.
Yep, I'll jump in there. Thanks. I have been under strict instructions, Councillor Webber, not to get too technical. So there is quite a comprehensive report if anyone wants to get into the detail. Yeah, I guess the key thing will be just to reiterate what Martin said. They're quite similar, option 1 and 2. They're both an MBR treatment plant, membrane bioreactor. They really do set the best practice in New Zealand. You know, both either option 1 or 2 would be absolutely best practice. You know, this will be Waipa taking a New Zealand lead, actually, absolutely. And they're quite similar. One is just got a slightly different step in the bioreactor to enhance that biological phosphorus removal. And if you are continuously dewatering sludge and taking away, you can actually quite efficiently remove phosphorus without that so much chemical. So hey, they are quite similar. And we've done some initial modelling, but there is certainly further modelling to go to really optimise and make that the best it can be. But yeah, either option 1, 2, or for that matter 3 and 4, all these options are far better than a conventional, what we call conventional activated sludge plant. These are all best practice. Yep. Martin's highlighted that option 4 is very new. So not used in New Zealand, and actually there's only a few examples overseas actually where that technology's been used. And we have had a lot of discussions with Martin and the team about that. And really the key recommendation there from us was that we would need to do a trial, to do some piloting on site, to really get confidence and working with the supplier around that. And that we think would probably push out the program, which was going to be a concern obviously for this project. And as Martin's talked about, with 3 is really some extra steps to either 1 and 2, looking at how to more efficiently manage solids. And the trade-off really is once you start digesting and pulling out the solids in a primary solid step, you then do need more chemical. You need more chemical to dose to compensate for that. So that's typically done where you need a lesser quality of effluent, which is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about best practice. We're talking about Pukekohe standard.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more information in the treatment options report, and there's also quite a lot more information about the greenhouse gas in a separate memo which we've done there, looking specifically at greenhouse gas emissions. And the only comment there is that, as Martin highlighted, each of these options is a 95% reduction in greenhouse gas. So it's huge. It's a huge improvement, and the actual differences between each one are relatively quite minor in comparison with that reduction from the existing plant. Yeah, I'm happy to talk for long, but I am at risk of getting rather technical and losing the audience.
No, that's good. Jim, did you have a question?
Yeah, or just a couple, Graham. In terms of the odour, are we confident that this new plant will be at least equivalent to our existing one? The reason I raise the question is historically that river terrace used for a freezing works and a large piggery, and we used to get regular complaints from the residents in Cambridge, and it was particularly to do with inversion layers over the river, trapping the odour in that area. So as long as we're not going to produce any more odours than the existing plant, then I probably can't see that as an issue. And the second one was, is there anything that we can do to strip out the phosphorus from the existing infiltration beds? Is there a crop that we could grow on there that would actually soak up that phosphorus? Because it seems to me that that's going to go on for many years, contaminating the river unless we do something about it.
Yeah, if you're happy with me to respond there, Martin, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, go on then.
Okay. Yeah, the first one was about odour, and all of these options we have been, I guess, very conservative with how we've approached that. So we've allowed for full covering, extraction fans, and treatment of all the odorous areas of the plant. So that's typically the inlet works, the screens, and the grit removal. We've got covers and ducts and fans and barkweed filter, and the other area is the solids thickening and dewatering processes. Those are really the smelly areas of the plant. At the moment, the inlet works are uncovered, and they do smell a little bit. You know, having visited the site a number of times now, there is some odour from there. Whereas the upgrade, we're talking about covering and extracting all of that. So there'll be a vast improvement from the existing plant to this new plant in terms of odour. And you know, the main bioreactor tanks, as per the photo, they are typically not covered. And that's because you're always maintaining aerobic conditions in there where you haven't got release of hydrogen sulfide and volatile organic carbons and other odor generating gases. The only difference there from option 1 to 2 is we have got this anaerobic step in there. And again, we have been quite conservative in this costings and this concept design about allowing for covering of that tank within the bioreactor where we have got anaerobic conditions. So, you know, it has been highlighted to us right from the start that odour is a concern, and I think we've approached it absolutely best practice and quite conservatively across all of those options. So yeah, I think we've got that one covered. The other question was around the phosphorus. So there's another consultant who's looking at that in detail. But what I can say is, having attended a number of meetings there, is my understanding it's the whole unsaturated soil zone. So there's about 8 meters of soil underneath those RR beds that is unsaturated, that is now of water, unsaturated with water, but does contain a lot of phosphorus. So, you know, any crop, you know, you would be talking about just drawing off potentially nutrients from that upper, you know, 600, 800 perhaps millimeter layer, but we're talking about many meters below that, where we can't draw that up with vegetation. You know, that we have batted around ideas about trying to extract water from under them and send it through the treatment plant. But you know, we're talking very expensive ongoing costs to do that. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think there is an easy solution. It's essentially a legacy problem that it is hard to deal with without spending a whole lot of additional funds, like putting bores down and extracting groundwater from under them and sending it through the treatment plant, and which would obviously require increasing the size of the treatment plant beyond what we have allowed for here. So we haven't really gone beyond, our brief hasn't gone to go beyond that.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we have, yeah, but GHD are currently analysing all those questions, Jim, to give us the answers.
Brian, we're running out of time. Don't want to bore anybody, but are we good to go? I'm expecting that going by the next steps, we'll see a report to the service delivery in October. Feel free to put some technical stuff in there, Daniel. So if there's no more questions, we'll wrap this up. Is there any more questions from councillors that are burning them? Okay, thank you. Daniel, thank you for your input, really good. And Brian, a good succinct report. So we'll look forward to getting that at my service delivery committee in October. Thank you.
Excellent, cool, thank you.
Thank you.
I think now we're moving over to the Land Transport Program funding. Brian, are you there?
Yes, I am, and I'm just sharing my screen with the presentation there.
Thank you very much.
So hopefully you can all see that.
Yep.
Just right. So yes, this is just a quick update on the release from Waka Kotahi of our funding levels for the next 3 years, which they gave to us at the beginning of September. So slide. So the headline items here in the first line, we can see the maintenance and operations and renewal program for 2018 to 21 was just under 37 million. We applied for 44.5 million and they approved 44 million. So the initial indication they gave us back in June was that there was a bigger reduction, but in the final figures, the reduction is quite a bit smaller. So just 500,000 over the 3 years. And the areas of funding reduction that they have nominated for us is in footpath renewal and in signs and marking. And so that 153,000 reduction there and 102,000 is just the Waka Kotahi share. And that's against budgets for footpath renewal of 1.16 million for the 3 years and 2.63 million for the traffic services, signs and markings and lighting. So they are minor reductions that we can manage within our program. Under the Community Road Safety Program, you see we applied for 533,000. They have approved 477,000 over the 3 years. But I understand from talking with our road safety coordinator just yesterday that there is some other funding available which might boost us back up to the value that we sought originally. So if that happens, that will be good news. So relatively small impacts in these areas of maintenance and community funding. Now, just councillors might look at the difference between 2018-21 and the 21-24 year. There's a difference there, but remembering there's a one-off project in there of 2.65 million to repair and repaint the Victoria Bridge. And there's also another 450,000 of additional funding where there's been a transfer of budget from Parks and Reserves for the Te Awa Cycleway, which will now be able to be done with subsidy. So that's moved into the maintenance and operations budget too for the next 3 years.
Okay.
So I can pause there and just answer any questions on this item if people have them.
It hasn't been a real slash, so that's good news, Brian.
Yep, very good. So moving on then. So under the walking and cycling program, you'll see the Te Awa Cycleway. It had a $5.6 million budget, and we've spent just under half of that up to the beginning of this financial year. And so the remainder there is carried forward as a capital project. So there's no problem with Waka Kotahi carrying that forward. The urban mobility case, again, that we've been completing, and they've carried forward the unspent sum from the previous program. Urban mobility implementation, which we were talking about earlier on in the service delivery meeting, a $4.2 million budget over the 3 years. So that's not yet approved in the funding program, but it is listed as a possible project, and it's listed as having been included in the National Land Transport Program and in the Regional Land Transport Program. So I'm reasonably confident that we will be getting some funding there when the business case has been through its final approval. So the big area then of reduction is in the low cost, low risk program. In the past, this was often called the safety improvement works or the minor road improvement works. So we applied for 5.27 million and we received a budget of 2.67. So that's just over half the funds were approved. And in the next slide, I'll detail the areas which are affected. So this is a bit of a breakdown of that 5.2 million. So under local road improvements, so these are general improvements. We sought 1.7 million and there was no funding approved. So that obviously still means that we do have our local share, which is 49% of that 1.7 million. But of that 1.7 million, 900,000 was for streetlight improvements. So that infill lighting that we've been doing, about $300,000 a year. So we will only have our local share or 450,000 over the next 3 years to continue that work. And then part of the Lamb Street, Rotaringi Road, roundabout and pedestrian improvement works. It's a partly growth funded project, partly subsidised roading funded project, and obviously loan funding project because of the growth. So they've not approved that one or the similar one on Frontier Road. So that means there's $800,000 there in total value, or about 400,000 of subsidy which is not available for those projects, and we'll just have to reconsider the timing or the extent or the funding for those two projects.
Brian, could I just ask about the Frontier Road project? So you say you're just going to have to look at the timing. It's going to make it pretty difficult though, isn't it? Like it's a completely like greenfield development. So have you got any more comments on how it might look if we don't get a contribution from Waka Kotahi at all?
Yeah, so the contribution to the Frontier Road project, which will be about a $1.2 million project, was 200,000 from Waka Kotahi. So it's not it's not a very small amount, but it's not significant either. And I believe that within the scope of the project and the funding and growth funding, that we can still make sure that happens. I mean, it's pretty essential that it happens. It lowers the vertical curve there, puts in curb and channel and street lights and a shared path to link up that growth area. So it's pretty essential it proceeds. Similarly with the Lamb Street one, it's pretty essential it proceeds. So I believe we press ahead, we complete the design work, and we also keep our eye on whether Waka Kotahi may have additional funds if the government makes more funding available, or other councils or the highways component don't spend their money, then some money may become free for us to apply for a review.
It's good to know that it certainly isn't a 50% contribution for like Frontier Road. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Next in the Road to Zero area, so that was really where we can see that Waka Kotahi have kept our funding level very similar to what we applied for, and this is obviously their priority to drive down deaths and serious injuries on the road network. So we have only a small reduction there, and this covers a whole lot of areas that we've traditionally done. So speed management, our CCTV program, guardrail improvements, school crossings, all of those types of treatments, traffic calming type works that we've done, and intersection safety improvements. So that will largely be able to continue as we intended. And then we have bus infrastructure funding for improved bus stops as part of our improved bus service contract. So that is the end of the last slide. The next one just says, have you got any questions? But happy to take any more questions that people have.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, Michael.
Yeah, thanks through to the chair. Hey, Brian, just that page you're on there, just that school crossings, and I know it's a bit of a stretch, but just back to that sort of lower Shakespeare, around that Cook Street Shakespeare area, would there be any chance, because it is predominantly probably for school-aged children of all ages, to incorporate a pedestrian crossing or two around the area as part of that 3.1 or that 2.955 million? Just your thoughts?
Yes, it may be possible. I guess there's always a lot of demand on this funding sort of budget, and we see that the likely improvement on Shakespeare Street is for all abilities to be able to cross the street safely is probably a set of pedestrian signals similar to what we're doing on Hamilton Road, and they typically come at a price of around $350,000 each.
Brian Graham here. We were due to have a pedestrian refuge going across Albert Street. Do you think under this budget scenario that's in jeopardy this year?
Well, I think we will have to look very carefully at all of the projects we've got on that list and see, what are the top priorities. But yeah, I do expect, we definitely will be getting some more school pedestrian crossings and other types of crossings in. I know there's quite a bit of demand for the street behind the Prongia School, where a lot of children enter the school there. They're keen on crossings as well, and we know that in Kihikihi we've certainly got a lot of demand for lower speeds on Whitmore Street and crossing places there too. So yep, right across our communities we've got similar demands, and it'll be a matter of trying to pick the highest priorities.
Yeah, thank you.
Brian, I'd like to ask about in the previous slide about we haven't got a decision yet on the urban mobility funding. Like, are you worried that that it might not eventuate, and therefore that wonderful business case that we looked at earlier, that it might really have to be rolled back quite a lot?
I guess I'm optimistic. Our interaction with Waka Kotahi to date has been very positive. There's a lot of staff support within their agency for the program. It's sort of passed through their initial funding gates to be funded for the investigation. They could see the benefit of it, and I believe they see the work that Waipa has already done in many places with them, whether that's in Te Awa or Streets for People, that there is a real drive there in Waipa to do this type of work and do it well. So I think we do have confidence.
Oh, that's good to hear. Thanks very much.
Any other questions before we cut off to Brian? All good. Brian, thank you so much. Good, succinct presentation, and yeah, not too bad in some areas and not too good in others, but we look forward to seeing that program come before. Okay, everybody good to go? Look forward to catching everybody at 1 o'clock in the finance meeting. Andrew, okay, you go home and check those big bundles, mate. Make sure you got them in the row.
See you all in. Have fun.
They're all there. Whoa, good stuff. Okay, all